It's okay if the 15, 20 people. Are there any questions from last time, what we had? Recording has started. No questions? So, I mean, I'm doing this, what I'm doing right now, it's sort of extremely standard complex analysis. And Stein and Shakarchi sort of do it in a very, express method of doing all these things. And of course, it doesn't tell you all the details that, all the power that may be there. And therefore, it's always good to read Stein and Shakarchi, but also have Conway at the back of your mind, because Conway does things in some sense more thoroughly. But then the reason of writing this book by Stein and Shakarchi on complex analysis is that he is applying that complex analysis that he develops they're applying it to some very interesting problems. And I hope we come to these problems over the next, we're already 2 weeks over. We are nearly coming to half the course. So let's see how much one can do. So I'm not spending too much time going through, the complete details of these proofs, because there are, in some sense, more interesting things or ways that these ideas are used to prove some very interesting results. For example, yesterday I told you that the Fourier transform of e to the minus pi x squared is itself. And similarly, there's a result that the Fourier transform of cos pi x, pi psi, the Fourier transform is itself, kind of thing. Okay, so these are properties that actually play an important role in some non-trivial kind of things. Okay, so you are hearing me because Kathri could hear me, and I suppose everyone else can hear me. Yes or no? Yes? Someone say yes. Other than that. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, let's see, where is this gone? Where is my, it's here, is it? And can you see this screen now? It's got the red sign.
Yes, sir, yes.
Okay. So the point is what? The point is that we are using various properties about residues, okay, to evaluate certain integrals. And the basic idea is that if you have a function which is analytic in that region inside the circle, right now, as I said, we are only talking about very simple contours, that they're circles or something that you can immediately see in some senses, some generalization of a circle in some sense, okay? And last time, we were at this business of what is a pole and what is a zeros. I have finite multiplicities, and you have a pole, and the order of the pole is given by this n when you multiply. If f has a pole of order n, then it's given by certain power series. And I said here somewhere there is a mistake that I have made, page 44. This should be evaluated at z equal to z naught. Okay, that's the evaluation. And therefore you have these things that this integral is 0. If k is not equal to 1, this integral is a. And if g is analytic. By the way, I must also say that there is always a orientation that is associated to these curves. So one must always, whenever you're drawing this curve gamma around a point or whatever it is, the orientation is important, okay? And the positive orientation is supposed to be the counterclockwise orientation of the circle, okay? I mean, this is just notation that is used in some sense, okay? And therefore you have is f is holomorphic, then integral of fz dz is the residue of f at z. And of course, if it is analytic, then the integral is 0 if there is no pole at z naught. And this follows, this I had done last time, I'm just reminding you. The idea is that you have this thing, you have this keyhole, and then it's analytic in this region. And then therefore you can say that the integral of the outer circle is the integral of the inner circle. Because those horizontal lines or the straight lines cancel each other out. Okay? Because one has to be slightly careful, but I mean, all the things that you have to care about actually work. And therefore, if F is holomorphic and of an open set containing a disk, except for a finite number of poles, okay, so it's holomorphic in omega, the omega contains a disk, and then I'm saying that integral over the boundary of the disk, inside the disk, because we know this notion of inside the disk, okay, we have poles which are Z1 to Zn, then this integral of the boundary is equal to some of the residues. Why? Because this integral over the boundary, okay, you consider a contour which has multiple keyholes, okay, and all these straight lines coming out, okay, the straight lines going in and out around the poles Z1 to Zk, those straight lines in the limit as the distance between those straight lines tends to 0, the contribution to the integral becomes 0, and therefore the integral over the boundary outside big circle is the sum of the integrals around the small circles. Okay, so this is an idea that one has to sort of play around with. Okay, and of course you don't really, and therefore you have this formula that we have here: sum over the boundary is sum of the residues. Integral over the boundary is the sum of the residues. One is called the residue theorem, and it's called the residue formula. Okay, integral of fz dz is sum of the residues. Okay, this I think is where we were. And then I said that there are these applications that you can get out of it, which in fact there are a huge number of important integrals, okay, which are evaluated using the residue formula. Okay, and it's worthwhile to play around with this idea of, you know, evaluate this integral. It's a real integral, okay, but to evaluate that integral, one needs this little bit of complex analysis to, you need, sorry, you need the residue theorem to actually evaluate it, okay? So there are any number of very important integrals that are evaluated using this residue formula, okay? And I hope in the problem session somewhere along the line, these kind of things you will spend some time and effort to evaluate these integrals, okay? It's worthwhile doing. You will get the hang of this business and you will understand how important this idea is. And very often the integrals are integrals of the whole real line, and those integrals of the whole real line, you're going to take a limit of some finite integrals, okay? And something is tending to 0, so you're using Cauchy's formula to close that, close the contour. Then you look at the poles which are inside the contour, calculate the residues at those poles, and the integral of the whole thing, whole contour is the sum of the residues. And then you evaluate the integral over the contour when the some parameter tends to infinity. As usual, this R and R is bad notation. Okay, gamma R and R. One is supposed to be script R for real numbers, and the other is radius R of that semicircle. So, you know, one is so used to this that you always call the radius you call R. Okay, so these kind of integrals, okay, are, I mean, they are quite important. And see what this is saying, okay? This again is saying e to the minus 2 pi I x psi dx. And here you have a function of x. And you have the same function here of x. Okay? So this third example also is an important example. It tells you that the Fourier transform of cos h hyperbolic cosine of h cosine of pi x is equal to, I mean, 1 over cosine of pi x has the Fourier transform to be itself. Okay. So this is also an important example, and we will need this a bit later on. And you have to figure out where are the poles, where are the whatever, and show that the integral over the remaining part of that contour tends to 0. Okay. So this is standard things. And similarly, you get this thing of here. This also is an important integral. Okay. So these are just a few of the examples where you're evaluating a real integral, okay, and you get a real answer. But when you're evaluating this, the way that you evaluate it is using the residue formula, which essentially means that you're using Cauchy's theorem, okay? So the evaluation of these integrals come out of Cauchy's theorem. So I hope you will spend the time and effort to evaluate as many of these integrals as you can. And I hope that somewhere along your PhD, when you're doing your PhD, you will come to a position where you have to evaluate an integral, and then the way that method that you will use to evaluate the integral will be the residue formula in some souped up form, hopefully. Okay. I mean, there are many ways to soup up this formula. Okay. And what do we mean by soup up? There's many ways to think that you are doing something which is much more than the residue theorem, but it would finally boil. You know, there's another thing that you must be able to see through here. Okay, there are basic theorems, okay, and there are theorems that look fancy, but then you must understand that it is the basic theorem that you must see. This simple, straightforward, plain vanilla residue formula can be made far more fancier than what is being done here. Okay. But you must be able to distinguish between, you know, what the important facts are in whatever this theorem. So vanilla residue theorem is the heart of the matter here. And I hope you understand how the word vanilla is being used here. Do you understand how the word vanilla means sada, ordinary, nothing fancy residue theorem, as opposed to, I shouldn't get into all that. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Okay, so the residue theorem in its ordinary simple form is actually very important. And then it can be made more precise. It can be made not, I don't mean more precise, it can be made fancier and fancier as you go along. Okay. And very often, you know, this is another thing that happens. Very often, people think that stating fancy stuff or fancy theorems, okay, actually tells you more or shows, impresses people. It doesn't. It's the basics that you must have straight. Fancy things come later. Anyway, so you have an isolated singularity. F has a removable singularity. If you can find a function, so I'm saying the function is holomorphic at every point except z naught. Okay, and we say it is a removable singularity if I can find another function that is holomorphic, which when restricted to the complement of z naught is a given function. So there exists a f tilde such that f tilde on the complement of z naught is f, and f tilde is holomorphic. Okay. So in this case, little f, because f tilde is holomorphic, this means that f must be bounded in the neighborhood of z naught. Okay. And then this converse to this statement is also true, that if you have a function which is holomorphic on the complement of a point, and it is bounded in the neighborhood of Z0, then f has a removable singularity at Z0. What does removable singularity mean? I can find a function f tilde, which is holomorphic in omega, including Z0, such that f tilde restricted to omega minus Z0 is f. So f tilde will be a holomorphic extension of f. So every bounded function, okay, which may not be holomorphic in Z0, but if it is bounded in this neighborhood of Z0, then the bounded function has a holomorphic extension, okay? And therefore you say that f has a removable singularity. So if it is bounded in the neighborhood of Z0, then it has a removable singularity. Why? So you have Z0 R has its closure contained in omega, and I define G of Z. See, Z0 is given. I'm defining G of Z to be f zeta d zeta over zeta minus Z, where Z0 is in there. Okay, and the claim is fz gz equal to fz for all Z. Okay, so first of all, I want to show G is holomorphic. G is holomorphic because f zeta was zeta minus Z. Okay, this is a holomorphic function outside these two keyholes, because I don't know that. The trouble here is that I don't know that f is holomorphic at which point at Z0. Okay, so I just take a little thing around Z0 and a little thing around Z. Okay, so f zeta over zeta minus Z. See, 1 over zeta minus Z may not be holomorphic at Z, and f zeta may not be holomorphic at Z0. So I just throw these 2 points out and take a contour like that. And then this is holomorphic outside the two keyholes. And therefore the integral is 0. And then in the limit, as usual, these two straight lines tends to 0. And therefore you have the integral over the whole thing is equal to the integral over this plus the integral over that, or with the minus sign. Okay. But then what do we know about the integral over this part? So see, 1 minute. Z is there, okay, and Z0 is here, and you have this ball like this. So I should say that zeta minus Z, f is what do I have here? The statement Z is far from Z0 is wrong. I should say Z is near Z0, okay, and therefore 1 over zeta minus Z. Where is zeta? Zeta is in the circle, center Z0, radius epsilon. Z is inside that circle. Okay. And so anyway, no, this is okay. 1 over zeta minus Z. Okay. Zeta is on the circle, and Z is zeta is on this circle. Z is inside C Z0 epsilon. So zeta minus Z is bounded. This is bounded away from 0. Fz is bounded. So this whole thing is bounded, and d zeta Z0 epsilon is the length of the circle of Z0 epsilon. So that is something like epsilon, and therefore the limit when you take epsilon tending to 0, it tends to 0. Okay, and therefore you only are left with the integral over the other keyhole, and therefore you get limit of Cz epsilon when epsilon tends to 0 is equal to this fz dz, which is what I get from here. So it's the usual idea that you're saying that it is holomorphic and it agrees with fz for all z. So this is very standard stuff now, I hope. You have to go through this a couple of times to show that, idea is the same. At the places where you have trouble, you just take little circles and keyholes around them, okay? And you play around with this idea, okay? And therefore you'll get that if f is holomorphic, except for one point Z0, and f is holomorphic, f is holomorphic except for one point z0, and f is bounded in a neighborhood of z0, then f has a removable singularity at z0. And removable singularity means what? There exists an analytic function defined everywhere which agrees with f at every point other than z0, because f need not be defined at z0. Okay, so so therefore we say that it has a removable singularity, and function f has a holomorphic extension g. And therefore, if you have an isolated singularity, okay, and it is a singularity, it is not a removable singularity, then fz must tend to infinity as z tends to z0. Okay, so near z0, what are the possibilities that we have? F may be bounded, okay, or fz tends to infinity as z tends to infinity, okay, or neither a or b are true. So you see, it may be bounded, it may tend to infinity. What am I saying here? This corollary seems to be wrong now. F has an isolated singularity at z equal to z naught, means that what should I have written as this corollary? F has an isolated singularity at z equal to z naught, which is not a removable singularity. Okay. My God, I should have corrected this. Huh? My next lines are correct, but that corollary line is not correct. Okay. What should that line be? What is the negation of f is bounded in a neighborhood of z naught? Yeah, so I should make a fuss about this. So I have that f is bounded in a neighborhood of z naught implies f has a removable singularity at z equal to z naught. Okay, that is what that previous thing says. So if f has a singularity at z equal to z naught, that means it does not have a, first of all, it is not defined at that point, and it is not a removable singularity. What are the possibilities that what are the possibilities that f can behave in? Do you understand what question I'm asking? Let me say this again. If f at the point z naught has a removable singularity, then f is bounded. F has a removable singularity at z naught if and only if f is bounded in a neighborhood of z naught. So f, what are the cases that remain? The cases that remain are
f is unbounded at z0.
That is one. So f is, I don't want to say f is unbounded at z0. What is the meaning of f is unbounded at z0? I mean, you have to, what you're saying is correct. F is unbounded at z0. That is correct. But even unbounded at z0, I want to sort of break it up further. How will I break it up further? It's unbounded means something is tending to infinity. Okay. It's obviously mod fz. So if it is unbounded at z0, does that mean that mod fz as z tends to z0 tends to infinity? So you're correct. F is not bounded in a neighborhood of Z0. F is not bounded in a neighborhood of Z0 means what? Does it mean that Fz mod tends to infinity as Z tends to Z0? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Okay, forget about complex numbers or anything like that. Okay, suppose we have a real valued function on a function f from r to r. I can say that f is bounded in a neighborhood of 0. I'm saying this statement is false. That means f is unbounded in a neighborhood of 0. Does that mean that limit when x tends to 0 of fx is equal to infinity? Yes or no? Come on, you must tell me. These are places where, I mean, even as you can see, I have written something wrong there in that one line. The next line is correct. So you have a function from R to R. Let me say this again. You have a function from real numbers to real numbers. And one statement is that f is bounded in a neighborhood of 0. Very good. F is bounded in a neighborhood of 0. Now I'm trying to tell you that this statement is false, which means that f is unbounded in a neighborhood of 0. Not in a. F is unbounded in every neighborhood of 0. Okay? If f is unbounded in every neighborhood of 0, does this mean that limit when x tends to 0 of fx in mod is equal to infinity? Yes or no?
No, sir.
If f is unbounded in every neighborhood of 0, does that mean that limit when x tends to 0 of mod fx is equal to infinity? Come on, this you must tell me. First of all, you understand what I'm trying to ask, isn't it? No, I get no response at all. So do you not understand what I'm
Sir,
trying to ask? Who's speaking? Yeah.
sir, but there can be a sequence, right, for which f of xn is converging to something else and xn is converging to zero.
So therefore, I want to say what? If you, I mean, this is what I want you to get, that if a function is unbounded in every neighborhood of 0, it does not mean that fx tends to infinity when x tends to 0.
Yes, sir, of course.
Okay.
That's what I also wanted to.
Okay. That's what. So the point is that there are so what are the alternatives? The alternatives are
The limit may
either
not exist at all.
no. So the alternatives are that either fx in mod tends to infinity as x tends to infinity, or this is not true. Okay, even though it is unbounded in every neighborhood of 0, this is not true. Okay, So one has to be slightly careful here about what you're talking about. Where am I? I want to go here, or I want to go here. So here, I should have been slightly careful here. F is an isolated singularity, does not imply mod f(x) tends to infinity. So this statement, this corollary I've written is wrong. Okay. What I should say, so just when you're reading this thing up, see on page 48, just cross out the corollary. Okay. Unfortunately, I don't have that thing in which I can write on PDF. But anyway, so the alternatives are that either f may be bounded in some neighborhood of 0, or mod fz tends to infinity as z tends to z0. Mod fz tends to infinity for all neighborhoods of 0 as z tends to z0, or neither of them are true. That means f is not bounded and mod fz does not tend to infinity as z tends to z0. Okay, so in this thing, that corollary I have written there is wrong. Okay, I should have been more careful there. So the alternatives are f may be bounded in a neighborhood of z0, or mod fz tends to infinity as z tends to z0, or neither a nor b are true. So f is unbounded in every neighborhood of z0, and mod fz does not tend to infinity as z tends to z0. Okay. So there are three possibilities. F is bounded in some neighborhood, fz tends to infinity as z tends to z0, okay, or neither a nor b are true. That means f is unbounded and mod fz does not tend to infinity as z tends to z0. Okay, so a is called a removable singularity, b is called a pole, and c is called a essential singularity. Okay. So A is a removable singularity, B is Z0 is a pole, and C is neither a removable singularity nor a pole, but it must be a singularity. Then we say it is an essential singularity. And the archetypical, the most standard example of this essential singularity is e to the 1 over z for z not equal to 0. Okay. Very good. If A is closed and W is not in A, then A complement is open and W in A complement. So there exists a delta such that ball center W radius delta is contained in A complement. Okay. And therefore, for all A in A minus W is greater than delta because the ball's center W radius delta is in A complement. So for all A in A minus W is contained in delta. If A is any set, A closure is closed, so I'll do this for A closure. Okay, for any W in A closure complement, there exists a delta such that all A in A, this is greater than this. So what is the Casorati-Weierstrass theorem? The Casorati-Weierstrass theorem is that the image of any arbitrarily small deleted neighborhood of an isolated essential singularity is dense. The image of any arbitrarily small deleted neighborhood of an isolated essential singularity is dense in C. Okay, let me say this again. The image of any arbitrarily small, I don't have to say arbitrarily small there, doesn't matter. The image of any deleted neighborhood of an isolated essential singularity, no matter how small that neighborhood is, the image of that is dense in C. So that means near any isolated singularity, you are sort of going to get close, arbitrarily close to any complex number. So you must have heard of this earlier. All of you have seen this Casorati-Weierstrass theorem. Okay. But the exercise here is first statement, first exercise is, so I'll come to the proof later. I think this is the end of this. No, good. No, not 54. So I've just told you the Casorati-Weierstrass's theorem. Okay. And I want to spend a great deal of time about this. Give me the epsilon delta proof. Sorry, not proof. Give me the epsilon delta statement of Casorati-Weierstrass's theorem. The next exercise is write down an epsilon delta statement for the statement the Casorati-Weierstrass's theorem is false. Okay, I'm going to stop here for 5 minutes and I want you to write this down. Okay, so I'll show you what the Casorati-Weierstrass's theorem is again. This is the Casorati-Weierstrass's theorem. Forget about the proof. The proof is trivial. The proof is very easy. Okay. So the Casorati-Weierstrass's theorem is that the image of any deleted neighborhood of an isolated essential singularity is dense. What is an, give me, translate this. This is English language. Okay. This is a language. And in fact, mathematics is a language, but mathematics is a very precise language. I want you to write this using, epsilon, delta, that exists for all, etc., etc., etc. Okay, how would you write this down? Any suggestions?
Sir, we have to work with that dense, I guess.
Yeah. What?
So the definition of dense, we want to say that it is dense in space.
That's what I want you to do. That's why I'm saying epsilon delta. Give me epsilon delta for all there exists. Okay. And write this down. What will you write down?
Sir, given x in C.
Yeah.
And epsilon greater than 0, a real number.
Mm-hmm.
We can find a y such that, we can find a y so that, the y in this region.
Yes, go ahead.
So, in the end, I want to say that mode of f of y minus x is less than epsilon.
Very good. How will you say this? This is what I want you to worry about. How do you say this precisely? Okay, you have an idea because you understand, you hopefully you claim to understand that language that I have written there. Okay. But how do you translate it into a proper mathematical statement? Or what is the proper mathematical statement for which the very vague English language thing I've described is this? And it gets, so I want you to try it out. All of you, I hope you have a piece of paper and pencil and you're beginning to write something down. Okay. What will you write down? So I've removed the theorem from your screen, so I should show it to you now. Where is it? So what I want you to do is, I have told you the English language words statement of Casorati-Weierstrass's theorem. Okay. I want you to write down the precise mathematical statement. And let me tell you that I mean, I've not taught this course in a while, but I sort of try to come up with this example in nearly every course that I teach. Okay. And you can ask versions of this question in any language. So the question is that, how do you actually write it down? And let me tell you that from past experience, out of maybe a couple of hundred students whom they're students, MSc students, okay, they're not, or even PhD students, it doesn't really matter. Okay, in mathematics, very, very few single digits people can write this down. Okay, out of a couple of hundred, the people who can write it down correctly will not be more than, single digits. So actually, this is a good thing to, maybe I should force you to write it down and see what you get. The whole trouble with this online business is that I can't see what you're writing down, and I can't tell you that what you're thinking is wrong until I see what you're writing down. Okay? Does everyone understand the question? Yes or no? As usual, there's no response at all. Huh? The question is, I've told you that statement, Casorati-Weierstrass theorem, but I have told you that statement, unfortunately, in a language, language. Okay? And I want you to write down that statement, precise statement in mathematics. So you must have, for all something, 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 there exists something, something, something. For all delta, there's something, something, something. Okay? And let me tell you that students find this, what about students? People find this extremely difficult to do. Okay? They find the statement that, to find the statement that the Casorati-Weierstrass theorem is false, they find that even more difficult to write down. Okay, so let me tell you the statement. I've told you the Casorati-Weierstrass theorem, and the statement is the Casorati-Weierstrass theorem is false. So can you first of all tell me in English what the statement that the Casorati-Weierstrass theorem is false? How will you write that in English without using this false business? Does anyone want to try?
Sir, so you are asking us to tell the statement which says that Casorati-Weierstrass is not true, right?
Yes.
So
Just try.
So it means there exists a deleted neighborhood of an isolated essential singularity whose image is not dense in C.
Now say that more. So there exists. Good, you have one. There exists. Now continue. I don't want any of the other which is not dense or which is whatever. So what will you say?
Sir, so there is an X in C.
Continue.
So let B be a deleted neighborhood of an isolated singularity.
Yeah.
And there is no sequence of f of yns where yns are in this set B, so that f of yns converges.
I don't want to
X.
use there is no sequence. Okay. Try to make a positive statement. what will you write down? Both this language business translated into mathematics and then the statement that it is not true. And let me tell you, I mean, don't think that I'm wasting your time. I am not. Okay. Every student has difficulties at this stage. And every student has difficulties at this stage because what is the reason you're having difficulties? Do you know? Do you know what the difficulties you're having are? No?
Making statements precise.
So where is the difficulty coming from? Do you realize that? So the difficulty is coming from the fact that all students of mathematics in India are terrified of what? Do you understand that? Yes?
Of being wrong.
No, that's okay. Everyone is terrified of being wrong. That is not a very big deal. Okay. And you must learn that you have to get out of it. Everyone is wrong before they're right. Okay. But they're terrified of what? And people don't understand this. All students are terrified of quantifiers. Do you realize that? All students are terrified about the statements for all and there exists. Okay. And this is one place where this, absolute terror that students have for quantifiers for all and there exists comes out in its most glaring form. Okay. Because you just don't know where to use for all, and you just don't know where to use there exists. Even though you have been playing around with these for all and there exists for at least 7-8 years now. Most of you are doing PhDs. Okay. So at least for, 5 plus 2 years, 7 years, you have been playing around with these quantifiers. And you think you are familiar with quantifiers. And then when I ask this kind of a question, you realize that quantifiers are objects that must be understood properly. Okay. And I'm not going to give you the answer of how you write that statement properly, precisely, okay, using a mathematical language, namely using for all there exists, then epsilon and the delta, and where is your W and where is your Z and what is your F, okay, and what neighborhood are you going to choose? How will you do this? Is it all neighborhoods? Is it there exists a neighborhood? Is it for all W's? Is it there exists a W, etc., etc.? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sir.
Huh? And now you will begin to realize, I mean, this is, you see, part of the job of a teacher, the first part of the job of a teacher is to confuse students in the sense that the teacher must point out to students where the students are confused. And then hopefully the teacher will clarify or remove the confusion. But if the students do not know that there is confusion in the first place, then removing the confusion is impossible. You must first realize that there is something to be done here. Okay. And the whole point is that most students are, I wouldn't say most, I should say all students are terrified of quantifiers, and they do not understand that they are terrified of quantifiers. Okay? And until you can translate this statement, Casorati-Weierstrass's theorem, okay, into a mathematical string of symbols, okay, for all something happens, there exists where something happens, for all epsilon greater than 0, there exists a delta greater than 0, that blah, 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 blah. Okay? Until you can translate that statement into an epsilon delta proof, inside epsilon delta statement, you will not realize how important or how useful or how precise quantifiers are for all and there exists. Okay, that is number one. And number two is, how do you negate a statement? You have some statement P. What is not P? Okay, Casorati-Weierstrass, CW. You have a statement which I call the statement CW. I mean, Casorati-Weierstrass. The question is, what is the statement not CW? Okay. So you must be able to write it down. First of all, you must be able to write down what the statement CW is. But given the statement CW, you must be able to write down not CW. Okay. What are these statements? And let me tell you that, you know, very, very few people can write it down correctly. Okay, it is nothing difficult. What I'm telling you is nothing difficult, but it may just be that our students have not been forced to spend enough time trying to appreciate what the meaning of for all and what the meaning of there exists. What are the meaning of these two symbols? For all x, something is true. There exists an x for which something is true. Okay? And that is a place where, okay, people find the proofs of these things quite difficult. Okay? So here, Casorati-Weierstrass again. I've told you something. The proof is very easy. Okay, I mean, the proof is not, you suppose, again, the proof is, suppose it is false, the closure is not C, then blah, 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 blah. And you will prove that the singularity is either a removable singularity or a pole. And but F has an essential singularity, so it is not a removable singularity or a pole. And therefore, this is a contradiction. And therefore, the closure of F of D is the whole space. Okay, that is all that the argument is. It's no big deal at all. Okay, the big deal is understanding what the statement of the proof is and what the statement of Casorati-Weierstrass's theorem is not true is. Okay, so I would be very surprised if more than 2 or 3 of the people in this class will be able to write it properly. Okay, so the trouble is I don't know how to get it. I don't know how to get it from you to get something in writing from you, other than saying that you write it out and send me a scanned copy the way that I'm doing. But then I will have 50 different answers on my inbox, and I don't know what to do with these 50 different answers. There's some way of doing this in Microsoft Teams, which it will go into Microsoft Teams. But then I believe not all of you have Microsoft Teams.